Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to my book readings. I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and this is my weekly check-in with my friends and family and viewers and readers to share my book, Losing Sight of the Shore. Let me center that a little better. This is my book that I wrote about living on a sailing catamaran with my family. The tagline is how to live on a boat without killing your family. Not that that ever was a possibility, but this week, so I've been doing this so far for 4 weeks in a row. I did like an intro and then 3 different chapters. And so now we are moving on to chapter 4. I wanted to let you know, if you are watching this live, you are welcome to put a comment in the chat or comment section of whether it's Facebook or YouTube or even on Twitter/X. And I can see those comments here in the studio, and I can even share comments on the air. Probably won't be able to do that while I'm reading, but I could definitely share some of them after the fact. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. This chapter is called KonMari to Move Onto a Boat. And I just remembered I don't have my glasses, so this will be interesting. I left them upstairs. We'll see how we do. All right. Henry Winkler of Happy Days, the Fawn's fame, once said, "I tell every child I meet, you have greatness inside you, and your job is to figure out what that is, dig it out, and give it to the world. He calls it greatness. I call it your superpower." If it is true that everyone has a superpower, then it's easy for me to say what mine is. I'm a super packer. Not like my husband, who is a different kind of super packer, as in a diehard fan of the Green Bay Packers, but as someone who can fit anything into anywhere. This may not sound like a superpower to you, but when you travel full-time with your family or move from a 2,500 square foot house onto a 45-foot boat, it is one of the most important superpowers to have in your arsenal. The problem is, just like with the Hulk's super strength or Supergirl's laser eyes, the same thing that makes you super can also be the thing that gets you into trouble. Or, to quote Rumpelstiltskin from Disney's Once Upon a Time, magic always comes with a price, dearie. So it is with my super packing ability. Just because you can do something, say fitting the contents of a large U-Haul onto your new sailing catamaran, for example, doesn't mean you should. I learned this dark side of my special abilities when we moved onto our first boat, Hakuna Matata. That first time around, back in 2009, when we packed up our house in New Mexico, I had zero clue about what we might actually need on a boat. Back then, I was so afraid that something would... Let me start that again since I can't see. Only if you're watching this video can you see my ridiculous reactions. Back then, I was so afraid that something would make us change our minds about pursuing our wild dream of living on a boat and end our adventure before it began, that I didn't even tell anyone what we were doing. We didn't tell our closest family or friends that we bought a boat until we had already driven from New Mexico to Florida. Even then, we just told people, we got a little place on the water. Looking back with several boat years under my belt now, that fear of criticism seems silly to me. But at the time, I was still trying to find my footing with this new life decision. So we kept it close to the vest. That meant that I didn't have anyone to talk to about the process, including what we should bring with us from our home. So just to be safe, I pretty much brought just about everything. At the same time, I thought I was being conservative with what I packed into the U-Haul. For weeks, I sorted through every single thing we owned and packed it little by little into the pods storage unit that was parked in front of our New Mexico house. Into that storage unit went chests, bins, boxes, and furniture, all nestled together like a Tetris puzzle until I filled every possible space, floor to ceiling and wall to wall, with the things that we were keeping but not bringing with us to the boat in Fort Lauderdale. When the pods guy arrived to lift the unit onto the truck before taking it to the storage facility, he commented that he had never moved a unit that weighed as much as this one did, and worried aloud that it might break the lifting equipment he used. In the meantime, in that moment, I should have realized the dangers of my superpowers. Instead, I packed all the rest of the stuff into our 12-foot U-Haul in the very same way. Every corner was spoken for, every tiny space taken. If we needed to access something in the back of the truck while we were on the road, it required quite a bit of deconstructing and then rebuilding to get to it. In other words, I used my superpowers to pack that truck to the max. Despite all the warning signs along the way, it wasn't until we started unloading and for transfer onto Hakuna Matata that I first realized we might have a serious stuff problem. In my mind, every single thing in that truck needed to make it onto the boat. In Nathan's mind, that was not only a physical impossibility, but also an ill-advised scenario. Since we were having this discussion after an exhausting cross-country trip with 2 little girls and a German Shepherd, while we were also under pressure to turn in the U-Haul right away, it was going nowhere fast. Finally, we decided to rent a storage unit so that I could move things onto the boat in a less pressured way, little by little and bit by bit. And by the way, I see some of you are here watching live, so hello. Feel free to put a comment if you would like, and I'll check it out at the end. All right, continuing. The good news is this solved our problem. The bad news is it wasn't solved the way any of us would have wanted it. The storage unit was broken into and all of our most valuable belongings were stolen. At first, when I arrived to the unit, everything seemed completely normal, with the lock looking just as I had left it when we put our belongings in there and secured it the night before. But when I tried my key, it didn't work. Over and over again, I tried to get the key to work until I finally realized why it didn't work at all. Someone had cut off our lock, stolen our things, and replaced it with another lock so security wouldn't notice. When I finally got into the unit, I discovered about half of our things were missing. Boat storage problem solved. Needless to say, this was devastating as we had only brought the things we thought we needed most. I don't know if you've ever had something stolen like this, but it leaves you feeling vulnerable and violated. I was just grateful it was a storage unit broken into and not our new floating home. This happened when we were still new to boats. Years before the robbery attempt on the Dawn Treader. If that had happened that first week on Hakuna Matata, we probably would have had a much shorter liveaboard story. Still, it was heartbreaking. It was a heartbreaking way to begin this brand new adventure, and the girls and I were pretty rattled by this experience. I really need my glasses, but I'm not willing to go get them in the middle of this live shot. And since I took a moment to pause, I'll say Olivia is here. So she says, hello, Rosa Linda. Hello, Olivia. Nice to see you. Okay, continuing. So we were rattled by the experience. Eventually, we managed to move the remaining belongings onto Hakuna Matata, and even with half of the stuff stolen, I had to get rid of a bunch of things. This was really difficult because I still had no idea what we would really need when we sailed away from land. With 2 little girls on board, I wanted to have everything we could need just in case. Even with my curated collection, Nathan grumbled about the weight and the water line, explaining that all that stuff really slowed the boat down. I don't know if this was really true, but that boat did move a lot more slowly than we wanted her to. Assuming Nathan was right on this point, I did things very differently when we moved on to the Dawn Treader years later. For starters, we had a lot more lead time moving on to the Dawn Treader than when we moved on to Hakuna Matata. With Hakuna Matata, the girls were too little to be in school yet, so we didn't have all the commitments that come as children get older and more involved in sports and social activities. We decided to move onto a boat, bought a boat, and moved onto her pretty quickly. By the time we decided to move onto the boat that would become the Dawn Treader, Ahava was in the middle of 5th grade, Ziva was in 3rd grade, and even Samuel was in pre-K. Plus, by then, Ahava was a competitive gymnast, training several times a week. Finally, Nathan's work commitments were much less flexible than when he was picking up locum tenens shifts on Hakuna Matata. All of this meant that we had several months to prepare for our move onto the Dawn Treader as we wrapped up our family's prior commitments. About 4 months before we left New Mexico, I started thinking about the daunting task before me. How would I pack up the house this time around? The good news was that, unlike the first time, we didn't have to pack up the whole house because we were renting it furnished to a family friend. That meant we didn't need to rent a storage container like we did before. Still, a big part of why I wanted to live on a boat was to simplify our lives, and I knew that meant I needed to downsize a ton of our stuff. Gratefully, that is when I discovered KonMari. KonMari is a system for decluttering created by Marie Kondo and taught in her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. As I write this, KonMari is quite popular since Netflix just released a series about this process. But a few years ago, when we were planning to move on to the Dawn Treader, KonMari was still pretty new. The idea of the KonMari system is to sort through each and every item you own and decide if it sparks joy for you. If it does, you keep it. If it doesn't, you let it go. That's it. Super simple, but not at all easy, believe me. I had heard about this book several times during the week I was starting to try to tackle all my stuff, and I felt like the universe was pointing me to it. So I decided to give it a try. The first step was to gather all of the clothes in the house, and I mean all of the clothes, and put them in a big pile in the living room. Then one by one, pick each item up and decide whether to keep it or let it go. Gently handling each item, asking if it still sparks joy, and then actually thanking it for its service before giving it away. As I did this, I couldn't help but think how ridiculous this whole thing was. Only it worked. Ridiculous or not, this method of taking the monumental task and breaking it down into one tiny step at a time actually led to a major breakthrough in my life. This wasn't just about downsizing to move onto a boat. This was about breaking an old, debilitating pattern and truly setting myself and my family free. Writing this book has been one surprising turn after another. I began this project thinking I was just writing about what it was like to live on a boat. But the more I write, the more I realize that it is also something else for me, a form of therapy. Writing is a chance to chronicle some major growth in our lives, both as individuals and as a family, and to share that journey with others. Throughout this sharing, I find myself wrestling with many questions, especially the question of how much is too much. The process of going from a normal life through the decision to move onto a boat and ultimately doing so is a bit like navigating through a new island chain. There are no straight lines, and the journey is often circuitous and unexpected. You think you are going in one direction, but before you know it, you decide that you need to go a different way entirely. Growing up, clutter was a serious problem. Some of my relatives had homes that were so filled with stuff that you couldn't see the floor or the counters or the bed. Our house was not as bad as that, but clutter was everywhere. This problem followed me into my adult life. No matter how clean I got the house, the clutter still remained. My husband, Nathan, is exactly the opposite. He never met a piece of paper or sentimental item that couldn't be thrown away. If it were up to him, we would get rid of about 80% of everything we own. On more than one occasion, we have had big arguments after he threw something away that I wanted or needed. Despite these occasional missteps, his tendency toward minimalism has definitely helped keep our house from getting buried in belongings. Well, at a glance, it seems like Nathan's way is the better way. The truth is that we really needed to meet somewhere in the middle. That's why the process of KonMariing the house is so wonderful. By the time you're done, you're left with only things that spark joy. This is no small thing. You don't save things for a rainy day. You use the things you love, and you love the things you use. As I look around the rental house here in Round Rock, Texas, more than 2.5 years since we first did our KonMari festival, I realize many of the lessons learned from that process are still enhancing our lives to this day. Far from a one-time process, the idea of KonMari is that you continue it every day. Each time you pick up an item in your home, Because of this, we have a permanent donation box in our garage where each family member will put their giveaway items as soon as they realize they are done with them and they no longer spark joy. Perhaps the biggest way we carry on the KonMari tradition is through our laundry. After sorting through every article of clothing you own, which in our case, as we prepared to move on to the Dawn Treader, resulted in more than a dozen heavy-duty garbage bags full of donation clothes, you also change how the remaining clothes are stored. Kondo teaches a folding method that ends up with your clothes standing at attention and placed in a shoebox size separator inside your drawer. You even do this with your socks and underwear. I call it my underwear bento box. Of all the parts of this process that I fell in love with, this folding style is the thing that sparks the most joy for me. We started folding our clothes this way in New Mexico and then just took the boxes right out of the drawers, stacked them in my Ford Expedition, drove them across country, and then placed those boxes of already folded clothes right into the drawers on the boat. When we moved off the boat and headed to Texas, we did the same thing in reverse. It is not a perfect system, as the folding does take longer than the regular style, but it is worth it because it helps reduce clutter and makes getting dressed a pleasure every morning. Well, the initial reason this KonMari method worked so well for me was to help me downsize to move onto the boat. The long-term benefit was finally breaking free of the emotional hold that stuff had on me. Going through the KonMari process was quite painful, especially with certain categories. Books were particularly difficult. By going through them one by one, I came to understand the reason I struggled to let them go was because they represented people that I loved, that I wanted to stay connected with. Even though I am not much of a reader, I love books because they represent potential. And in the case of books given to me by people I've lost, they make me feel closer to them, as I imagine what they might have been thinking when they were reading them. On more than one occasion, though, through the KonMari process, I was shocked to catch myself crying as I thanked a book and let it go. This is not to say I gave away all of my beloved books, just that I came to terms with the fact that some books I will never read and allowed for the possibility that by letting them go, I could spread the love to someone else. More than anything, KonMari gave me permission to let go of past limitations and begin the new adventure of moving onto the boat. The process of breaking it all down into bite-sized pieces and focusing on the joy of things also gave me the slow, steady sense that I was doing the right thing. It helped build confidence to get through the moments of panic that would wash over me from time to time leading up to the move onto the boat. I had given myself a 90-day countdown to pack and get ready to leave New Mexico. During those 90 days, I used KonMari to make daily progress toward that goal. But as is usually the case, as my deadline grew closer, the task seemed more daunting. In hindsight, I should probably accept that this is always the way I have moved forward in my life. In the end, I stuck with the KonMari process that had already worked so well for me, because I knew doing the hard work now would save a ton of agony later. Part of my formula for accomplishing difficult things in my life is to build accountability into the process. With KonMari, I knew that reading a book about controlling clutter and actually implementing the entire system it teaches are two very different things. Gratefully, live streaming was just becoming a thing around this time, and I was quite comfortable on camera because of my broadcasting background. So I started sharing our KonMari process with a live 90-day countdown. This really helped me in two ways. First, it made me feel like I couldn't quit because others were following my progress. And second, the supportive comments from family and friends helped me stay excited about the move and feel like I wasn't really crazy to be doing this. Or totally crazy to be doing this. I was crazy, but not totally crazy. I really believe it was a combination of live streaming and the KonMari process that made it possible to downsize our house and move onto a boat for the second time. So it was on a hot day in June 2016 that my three kids, our babysitter, and I squeezed into my Ford Expedition, overstuffed with all of our belongings, and drove from New Mexico to Riviera Beach, Florida, to move onto the Dawn Treader. Just getting everything and everyone into the car was a minor miracle. This time around, we didn't have a U-Haul, a roof rack, or a trailer, just the trunk and the area around their feet. The kids could barely move because of all the stuff. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. And we have some pretty funny stories that came out of that cross-country trip. But as uncomfortably heavy as that car was, I knew when we got to the boat, our hearts would be much, much lighter because everything in that SUV would easily fit on a 45-foot sailing catamaran, and every single thing on that boat, including the boat itself, would definitely spark a lot of joy. I'd like to think Marie Kondo would approve. There you go. So that's the story of KonMariing to downsize. There's a little footnote that says you can see those videos on newmexicast.com. I'm not sure if they're actually on there, so I won't promise that. But maybe I'll share some of those videos here in a future live stream of how we KonMaried the whole house. I'd love to start doing some questions, Q&As in the coming weeks. Now that I've started these live streams, I'm reading a chapter a week, but I'd also like to start soon sharing some of the photos and videos from these adventures, because every time I read a chapter, it brings me back to some of the wonderful things we've done. All right, well, that's it. That was chapter 4, KonMari to move onto a boat, of losing sight of the shore, how to live on a boat without killing your family. Thanks for watching and listening. And I'm Rosa Linda Román. Bye.